Let's get to the potential exploits when we are defending the big blind and facing a continuation bet. In this video, I want to show you how I think about exploiting in that exact spot, and I will show you my 3 favorite exploits that I'm always thinking about in this spot. I will just start with what I finished with in the theory part. And this was about every continuation is an investment. And I want to know my returns. I want to know where EV comes from. And now it's about exploiting, which means villain is doing something wrong. So I want to know how villain's mistake boosts my EV of a certain line. How I can make use of his mistake to put his money in my pocket. First, let's check out the game tree. It's our turn to make a decision now while being out of position and facing a Cbet. If we are not folding, we have 2 options left to continue with. We can either raise or call. And that will lead to different future games. If we raise, villain has to make another decision on the flop where he can make mistakes. If I'm calling, we get dealt a turn and proceed from there. I clearly want to split the optional mistakes from villain into 2 parts. The first one is that villain did something wrong in the past, which he cannot react to anymore. This happened. He might have chosen the wrong sizing. He might have Cbet at a too high or too low frequency. His range therefore might be too strong or too weak. And we can exploit that right away, having that information. But we can have information about villain's future mistakes as well. He might be calling too much versus a check raise. He might be overfolding versus a check raise. He might have certain leaks when continuing versus our call on the turn. Double barreling too often, not double barreling enough. Folding later more versus check raises. Folding versus a river bet too often after a turn check, and so on and so on. I want you to have that image in mind. What is villain doing wrong, and how likely do we get there? What happened in the past, villain cannot change anymore. So this is always my first step when thinking about exploits. And now I actually just want to show you my favorite exploits that I'm thinking about every single time I am in that spot. I will start with something that attacks mistakes of villains in the past. And my favorite exploit number 1 is check raising very light versus continuation bets where villain is likely to be c-betting too much, not realizing that he doesn't have a clear advantage. If you checked out already the community coaching that I did with Fedor regarding building check raising ranges, you will probably remember my favorite board of Queen 5-6 Rainbow, where the big blind has a huge advantage, a huge nut advantage over time, given all those straight draws around the 5-6 that will make us nuts on the correct turn and river cards. So we can make use of that. And villain shouldn't c-bet too wide with all his offsuit broadways he might be having. So since this still looks like a dry board that is queen high, there are lots of villains who might even be range betting on that board. And this is a big problem. They just have too many hands that cannot defend versus a check raise. And this will naturally lead to them overfolding. They won't float their king jacks and ace jacks and ace 10 offsuits after c-betting. And this is a lot of offsuit combinations. So whenever people are likely to c-bet too wide, I like to go crazy with check raising. Still keeping an eye on the structure of my range, not going with like stupid hand selections. But I want to increase frequency to the maximum. My favorite exploit number 2 is actually the nitty one, the overfolding one. And at the same time, as I mentioned here in the slides, fast playing. What I'm saying here is pretty much that seeing a big Cbet of villains on a certain board, I assume that this is often triggered just by their hand, which is a natural thing that this is value heavy. I'll make an example. Someone c-betting large on King Jack 8 with a flush draw, while having that small c-bet range as well, is just very likely to just have ace king or aces or king queen this time and trying to protect from all my draws. Which is, if we put that in a solver, a totally fine strategy. What I'm saying is that those players are often missing their ace-5 suited without the flush draw, their right frequency of random gut shots, because this just goes in the so-called standard c-bet that is often small. So I expect from lots of villains where I write down that read that they are actually very value heavy when it comes to big c-bets. And that means that I need equity versus that special hand category. I'm happy to just fold very clear continuations on that flop right away, overfolding, while exploiting that at the other side as well and fast playing when I have it. When a villain has king queen or ace king, they will always call a large check raise. But once the flush gets there, or all the straights, the action might cool down. So actually I have two ways to exploit the same thing: overfolding and fast playing better hands at the same time. Pretty much just making use of villain telling me his hand. Now coming to favorite exploit number 3. An exploit versus more passive players. The lower the stakes, the more I'm doing that. And now this is the first exploit where I'm actually attacking a mistake that will happen in the future, or I assume that this mistake will happen. Villain does not need to have done something wrong for now, but I expect him to proceed in a wrong way on the turn and river. That might be multiple things. This one I'm saying villain is too passive. Maybe not double barreling often enough. Maybe not bluffing with bet check bet often enough. And that, all that together, increases my equity realization. So my bottom pairs will on average see more cards, and they will realize their equity better, not getting bluffed too often on the turn or river. So by villain making clear mistakes on turn and river, I gain future EV and therefore have a higher return in the future for the investment I'm making right now. And that leads to me just defending more and more of speculative or very weak hands on the flop. Doing that mainly by calling. Now, I showed you the game tree and told you how I think about that. Especially thinking about mistakes villain could do in the past already and mistakes that villain is potentially doing in the future. Now, our main question was, where does our EV come from? Why should we do that investment of a flop call or a flop check raise? Now those mistakes should give us a clear answer. And we need to find out, how do we exactly benefit from that? Where is our EV hidden? Is it in the future? What do I need to do? I don't like saying I continue here because villain is good or villain is bad or villain is whatever. I want to be precise with my information. And the more clear read is, the more I can exploit. The closer the read is in the game tree, the better I can react. Villain might do stuff wrong on the river, but can that really be a good reason to exploit him on the flop right away? While knowing that he will overfold to a check raise just enables me to go crazy right away and be sure about it. So this is how I'm thinking about exploits when I'm facing a Cbet as the big blind defender. And now I would advise you to check out as well the live play or review video I did regarding this topic.